Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the launch event in the Today's Training Risk Management Series. This is a programme of events that will run throughout 2025, addressing a range of topics related to risk management in legal services firms. Throughout this series, we will be focusing heavily on the intrinsic link between good risk management and good business practice, something that I know our panellists are going to address today. I would like to introduce each of our panellists: Paul Saunders from Legal Eye, Calum MacLean from Miller Insurance Services, Simon McCrum from McCrum Legal, and Andrea Cohen from Waitman's Compli. And I'm your chair for today. My name is Emma Vigus, and I specialise in PI insurance and risk management for a number of years. We will have plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end of the panel Q&A. If you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A or recall them for the end of the session. I'd like to say a very, very big thank you to our headline sponsors for this series, PEXA UK, to all of our panellists for today, and also everybody who's agreed to provide training throughout this series of events, which will run throughout the year. So without further ado, we're going to lead straight into our first question. Calum, what do you think is going to have the biggest impact on the risk landscape for legal services firms in 2025?
Nothing like giving me a simple question to answer. I'm going to have to harness my inner Donald Rumsfeld, I think, here. And if we're talking about the known knowns, I think it's the attitude and behavior of regulators that will have the biggest direct impact, because we are seeing quite an active regulatory context with so much going on in that field, and not always very helpfully either. And I just think that is one of the biggest things that comes up with all the firms that I speak to about what impacts their day-to-day risk environment and what concerns them. If we're talking about the sort of the wider risk events, going back to Donald Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns, if we're to be unlucky enough to have any particularly big impact issues, I think they're going to be external factors. And frankly, if I could tell you exactly what they were, then they probably wouldn't occur because people would be prepared for them. But I think the political and economic environment that we're in poses quite a lot of risk factors, just in terms of the potential economic threats, impacts, inflationary impacts that can have, market impacts. There's just so much going on in that sphere that can have an impact on the legal business environment. And not unrelated to that, I would ally sort of another external threat. Now, we've already seen, a massive rise in the last few years of cyber attacks generally, and we've seen major impacts of events like CTS, but they're relatively small scale in comparison to what could happen if there was a really major cyber attack that impact the profession. And so, in terms of black swan events that firms should be preparing for, that's what I would be looking at in that sphere.
Thank you, Calum. We're going to cover regulation in more detail actually in our next question, but Andrea, Paul, Simon, do you have any views on that sort of the big factors impacting the risk landscape for this year?
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I think there are internal and external factors, obviously, and as Calum's pointed out, there's a lot of external ones which we necessarily don't know what's coming around the corner. But I think internally, I think actually the ability to attract and retain talent across our industry is absolutely crucial to the impact. in respect of risk, because I think over the recent years we have suffered from exodus from the industry, and the quality and skill sets of our people are absolutely crucial to this, and attracting the right talent and making sure your firm is safe and secure for them to work in actually is probably more important to people now than the salaries. Historically, we probably fought over pricing. I think now we fight over quality, and actually, quite rightly, our people want a better experience and they want to make sure they're in a safe environment.
It's so important, isn't it? We often say that people are the front line of defence, and I know we're going to touch upon culture and people later on in this webinar today. Simon, anything that you'd like to add to this? Simon, you're on mute.
Forgive me. Yeah, I'd absolutely like to add to it. I can only see the risk situation and the risk environment getting worse. But it's actually nothing to be afraid of if we recognise that. If law firms get it right and they get everything right in a joined up way, it's a license to change lives. And there's a price to pay for that. You can't make that you can't get that kind of business success without complying. But it's about more than ticking boxes. And the areas I see where risk is coming for law firms it's a wide array of risk. Some of them already exist, some are getting worse, some are new, but they're all joined together. And I think, as with business of law, in the whole risk management dimension, you are on a spiral upwards or you are on a spiral downwards. And you've got to get it right and make sure you're on the spiral upwards. And if I list, which I did ahead of this call, if I list the areas where, if I was still a managing partner, the things that would be keeping me awake at night would cover the following areas. Downright business risk, not getting paid, cash risk. We'll come on to it later, but right now we've got a lovely covering of roses that are covering a multitude of sins in law firm businesses called interest rates. Interest is keeping the lights on in many law firms. They haven't got enough fat. Emma, in your language around this event, you talk about resilience. I call it fat. Law firms need fat on the bone, because there's going to be storms. You can't you can't manage your way away from all of these risks. Now, you could take another path. If I take the risk that Paul highlighted, it's a big risk, losing staff, losing a partner in a team. That's not just the competitors that are willing to often borrow money to pay higher salaries. They can't always afford these salaries, but it's down to a particular risk that I think private practice law firms face at the moment, called the rise of the consultancy model. Swathes of senior lawyers are leaving to go and join the well-known names that are showing a new way of life for lawyers. And I think private practice law firms have to fight back and show that, wait a minute, there's risks, there are advantages, there are far more uplifting reasons to be in our organization than in an organization of what is effectively one in some ways. There's the cyber, there's the regulatory. I see only yesterday the latest fine, 37,000 quid. Well, that's only going one way. So the risk is everywhere. Competition, it's everywhere. Professional indemnity claims. I'm reading the markets Calum can tell us all about this. I'm reading the markets softened a bit. I tell you what, it hasn't softened when you've got a bad claims record. So all of these things, and my overall biggest risk, Emma, I see for law firms is they think all these risks aren't joined together and that they are someone else's fault.
It's really interesting. So in the context of this, answering this first question, we've covered every single element of running a business: finance, people, leadership, cyber, technology. And I think, Simon, that highlights a point you made about risk being interconnected and the need to take a holistic approach to managing it. We've touched on regulation. Andrea and Calum, I'm going to come to you now. Andrea, could you just give us an overview of what the regulatory landscape is looking like for this year, both in terms of regulation that legal services firms are currently dealing with, but also what's on the horizon?
It's huge, and it's just getting bigger. And just when you think it's all sorted, something else comes out of left field and you're dealing with something else. And I don't believe there are any law firms who are completely in line with everything, because you can't be. But what you have to be is agile enough to be able to add those extra elements and have things in place already. So you have to have the foundations properly and then build on that, because if you haven't got those foundations, you're just going to flounder. And as Calum alluded to, the SRA they're under pressure themselves. So they're picking on that low-hanging fruit. And we're seeing fines for things that people didn't have in place in 2017, 2018, 2019. Now, my view is if you haven't got things in place in 2023, for example, which was that huge fine that we saw reported yesterday, putting it as bluntly as I can, you really only have yourself to blame. But if you've got everything in place, but you're being penalised for what you didn't have in place years ago, that to me is not the way regulation or our regulator should be dealing with it. Should be getting the benefit and the credit for what you're getting right and given the assistance to add the meat onto those bones, rather than being terrified that you're having an investigation by the SRA and actually not knowing what they're coming in for. I've got a number of clients who I've done independent AML audits for example. As far as I'm concerned, they meet the regulations, they're doing what they need to do. But then they've got the SRA coming in and say, mention that, and you've not mentioned that. And the whole thing, everybody then takes a step back because they don't have the confidence to do what they really know that they should be doing. So I think we're getting it at all sides. You've then got the attitude, well, it is a tick box, and absolutely regulation should not be. You should be using it to be able to develop your practice. Don't think for those firms who are doing their risk assessment that it's all about ticking those boxes. It's about finding out about the client. Use the opportunity. Are there additional things you can be doing at the same time and building on the relationship with the clients? But I think the way some training is done, it's about, well, you need to know X, Y, and Z, but not necessarily use that as a positive impact to how you can be building the business and reducing those risks. And it's everybody, it's not just top management, and it's not just those people doing the files. Everybody should be working towards the same aim.
And have we got regulation coming down the line, Andrea, this year that you envisage? And it sounds like regulation is just challenging, full stop at the moment, but is there anything coming down the line that you envisage proving really challenging for legal services firms in terms of new regulation?
There's huge potential out there. We've just finished the consultation that if the SRA's proposals to prevent law firms having client accounts comes into force, you're going to see huge changes. I can't see how that's going to happen personally, because putting all our money into one source, it just makes it easier for the cyber criminals to just create complete havoc. And it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It should be the SRA improving their processes, what they do about setting firms up, not the individual firms who are doing their best in this financial situation with all the issues that have already been referred to. Most firms will deal with what is coming down the line, providing they're given the support and guidance to be able to do it. We've also got the issues of the the consultation on the huge fines that the SRA would like to be able to impose now, because now that they've got the freedom with the economic crime, financial crime issues. Again, if I was a young lawyer looking at the potential of having my salary, being fined my entire salary for the year, is it an industry I'd want to go into? Probably not.
Yeah, and Calum, how is this regulatory environment manifesting itself in terms of both professional indemnity claims that you're seeing, but also Simon mentioned the PI market has softened, but what are sort of underwriters looking to in terms of concerns for the future?
Well, in answering that, I just want to very quickly go back to the previous question, in the sense that it's an observation really that the things that generate professional indemnity claims are often materially different from the issues that regulators focus on. It's not to necessarily say that what regulators are focusing on are the wrong things, and genuinely not saying that, but they're just often materially different. In terms of claim numbers, we're in a period of relative claims calm. But that said, we know everybody that I speak to confirms that clients are becoming more confrontational and inclined to claim. And where we really are seeing things change is claims value. Claims values are ratcheting up, and indeed the cost of defending claims. One area where claims they've increased materially, and that's in private client work. It's a combination of factors: higher asset values, volatile markets, complex family structures. They all play a part, and so underwriters are definitely spending more time focusing on private client work than they did in the past, and just trying to drill down into how firms are managing that risk. On a positive note, I would say that the number of fraudulent sales seems to be down from where it was a few years back, but I think again, global politics, ways of working, and the emergence of AI does mean that cyber threats, which have been long talked about, are becoming increasingly real. And this is an area where there is a strong overlap between regulatory issues and insurance claims, because information security breaches allied to cyber attacks are real and can be really costly now. And we're seeing regulators, not just the SRA, but Information Commissioner, getting more financial teeth. And going to Andrea's point, I really fear for the profession with a regulator such as the SRA having, if it does get much higher fining powers, I think that could be a really scary environment. Then at a sort of more macro level, and it's alluding to something that's already been mentioned by Simon here, the makeup of the legal sector continuing to change, I think is relevant. There's been a rise of disruptor firms, there's ongoing market consolidation, and there's the slightly bad history of some of the aggregator firms picking up distressed risks. And the reason I flag these is that there's elements of experimentation and change in the legal model, and that does inevitably, it leads to innovation, it leads to positive change, but it also leads to additional claims risk. And what we have seen is that there are certain disruptor firms who are chasing growth, perhaps without that fat that Simon again talked about. And also sometimes the fat funds good foundations that Andrea was talking about, particularly if you're working with different models, you need to actually work harder at the underlying risk controls, the ways of working, the systems and processes. So my concern and the underwriter's concern is that some of those firm models are going to, as they already are, leading to some costly claims. And that final point on this for me, what we're seeing arising from some of these firms, as well as traditional firms, is more on the commercial and corporate side than we have done for a while. I know that for some insurers, it is by far their most costly claims. We've seen some up to 9-figure claims coming from, for example, corporate transactions or banking transactions where there may have been tax issues. So that although we don't tend to see a volume of claims in this area, some of the big non-traditional firms that are doing big ticket work may not have the risk controls in place that afford insurers comfort.
Calum, you mentioned that consolidation in the industry. To what extent do you think acquirers are paying due heed during the due diligence process to analysing historic risk in the target firms that they're looking at?
It varies hugely. Some of the firms that I deal with are definitely much more switched on to that than they were in the past. I definitely see much more awareness of that, but it is obvious from some of the big name cases that we all know about that there has been a sort of corporate greed model that has sort of shortcutted due diligence and just looked at a big prize and not been underpinned by really robust either business thinking or indeed legal management thinking. And those are the ones that are not only causing a risk to themselves, but causing a risk to the profession.
Thank you, Calum. Sort of staying on this theme, and I know that we're gonna touch on some topics we've already addressed, but I think that's important to everybody who's joined us today. There will be repetition throughout this series, and there's a good reason for that, and that is because there are 3 or 4 key pillars to risk management, and they will come up time and time again. Paul, what are the common themes that are typically revealed when you're sort of working with firms that have had challenges? What manifests as challenges with managing risk? Do you see common issues in those firms?
Yeah, and I think one thing I would just like to say, just from an overview perspective, actually there are an awful lot of firms out there that actually manage this really well. And whenever we talk about risk and compliance, we talk about the fines, we talk about the drama side of it, because that is the part that probably scares those that run the firms the most. But actually there are an incredibly large number of firms that are managing through this, as everybody has said, challenging landscape, and they do it very well. I think from our point of view, the general trend where there are issues, the general trend, I think, is very much one of probably a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding, and an awareness that they do need to do something. And very often we find that we talk to firms and we'll make recommendations and suggestions, and that firm then either financially will not be able to necessarily afford to implement those things, or they don't necessarily feel that they need to do it at that particular point in time. And then subsequently 12 months, 18 months later, they are coming back to us because they've got an SRA investigation. And I think that is a very, very sad situation for the organisations, because they they have an awareness level, but actually making that decision internally, whether that's financial or whether it's procedural decisions, they do make the decision not necessarily to address it at that particular point in time. I don't think you can do these things too early. I think it's interesting. The regulators are looking at all sorts of aspects, and we've had AML for a long time as the primary risk focus. But actually, we are now seeing some other interesting ones coming out. Things like post completion, things like our approach toward billing. So we talk about AI and we talk about the involvement of tech, and actually firms that are billing on an hourly basis are probably now being quite challenged around how do they justify that if they are utilising different tech, which is reducing the timescale. So does actually, whilst I acknowledge what's said about interest and running our businesses, utilising the income as of interest, is probably not the best financial structure. It's there and it may stay, it may not. But I actually think trying to make our businesses profitable with the use of AI and then keeping it within the regulatory frameworks of transparency is probably a better focus area for the organisations, because actually then we can think about profitability in a different sense and perhaps more naturally moving away from the sources of income that we've currently been used to.
Paul, do you think you referred earlier to a sort of lack of knowledge and understanding? Do you think that partly arises because of the point that Andrea was making earlier about this, what sounds to me like a relative fluid regulatory landscape? Firms believe they're doing everything right, but actually the SRA are then picking them up on something that maybe they've not envisaged.
I think running any business is fraught with all sorts of challenges from all sorts of directions. And I think in a regulatory environment, you have a third party who imposes challenges on you that you may not have seen coming. But 9 times out of 10, I think a lot of these challenges, if we do look at the way we run our business, very often we can envisage a lot of these things, and we're dealing with protecting the public at the end of the day. And actually those clients, I think without fail across all of our colleagues, they all put that as their primary concern. They all want to look after the client. So I think at the root of it, we know the challenges, we understand the challenges. Whether we have the money or the skill sets to implement them is a different matter. And I think sometimes it's looking outside of your organisation and seeing where it's possible to get help and support for the tech implementations, and also managing client demands. We said that right at the start. Client demands are increasingly challenging, and we do have to change to adapt.
Mm-hmm. Andrea, from your experience, what would you like to sort of add to Paul's response in terms of, you know, root causes of issues in businesses?
I think people are generally, they want to do their job properly, they want to work with people, but it's about having to balance all the demands on their time and their abilities. You've got fee earners who have targets to meet, you've got partners who are looking at the profits. If we're looking at, you know, compliance or negligence claims, investigation, the vast majority, in my view, people do not get up in the morning and think, I'm going to make a total mess of this. This is the way I'm starting my day. Life happens, and it's having that structure and support around people and the culture that we will discuss as well, for people to feel confident that they can say, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't deal with this. Can you help me? It takes time. And even those of us who've been around a long, long time, there are certain times where you just think, who can I ask about this? And if you're struggling, it's not going to make it any better. Simon and I used to work together, and you know, you'd have that file on the end of the desk that was causing you those sleepless nights. If you haven't got somebody to discuss with. And if you read the cases that go to the SDT, a lot of it is about people who wanted to do their best, thought they were genuinely doing their best, but they did something stupid. And some of the matters that I look at, I just think, how did you think you were going to get away with that? It is totally out of order. But the vast majority are, I can see how you got yourself into that. And it's having the courage to actually say, I need help, and not feeling that you're going to be, you know, somebody's going to criticize you for it. And, you know, the word, to me, I think it was Simon that said, Tom, the word compliance is actually quite a negative word, because you shouldn't just be complying. It should be a part of what you're doing. You're not doing it going to look after the clients and look after the business at the same time. But yes, there are risks, but it's about having the confidence to work together and do what you need to do and build on that.
It's the sort of concept. I think it's a relatively new phrase, but it's very important of psychological safety, isn't it? It's making people recognise that it's okay to put their hand up sort of early in the stage of experiencing difficulties and saying, I'm finding this challenging. And it sounds so simple for me to say it, but I think all of us will have worked in businesses where actually that's incredibly hard to do, particularly if you're in quite a junior role. Calum, just very briefly, your thoughts on this, because I wanted to move on to the next question, which on a lot of what we're discussing.
Exactly. Well, it's the common themes, and it's both externally facing and also internally, as Andrea's just alluded to. It's time pressures and communication failures that are really at the heart of so many of the claim issues, and particularly with people remote working, whether it's remote clients or remote working internally. Actually, those communication failures are exacerbated because it's much more difficult to have those informal conversations. It's much more difficult, particularly with clients who, frankly, are not engaging with the material substance of a lot of matters, even when they sign documentation. So when you're not having face-to-face time with them, communicating important messages is really tricky, and it is leading to claims. I want to add a top tip on this, which is, an element of resolution to that is that, to my mind, if you can centrally identify high-risk matters and materially quantum of claim, if something goes catastrophically wrong, being a key element of that. If you then spend a few additional units of time checking key documents and key stages, you actually, if you're just doing it on those highest risk files and have a central oversight of those, you can save yourself so much time, money, and stress. And that is my biggest takeaway from the analysis of the root causes of failures on that front.
Thank you, Calum. And I'm hoping we're going to have time to come back to the topic of client onboarding when we can talk about that in a little bit further detail. Simon, the word profitability has come up a lot. Can we explore the correlation between financial management and risk, perhaps using some examples from your time as a managing partner, but also I think this is a topic that you address in your books as well.
Yeah. So I in this call and so far and going forward, I'll keep referring to the fact that a lot of this is all joined up. You can't. In a busy law firm, you can fall into the trap of compartmentalizing challenges. It's all joined together, and I advocate a law firm having its way. This is the way we do things. And that's got internal and external aspects. Internally, it's how we treat and develop and reward our people. It's how we operate as a business. I'll come back to that because that's your profitability. External, it's about how we look after our clients. Okay, now it's a four-legged stool. Clients, cash, colleagues, and compliance. They're all, you take one of those legs away, the thing wobbles, and when it gets windy, over it goes. Now, if you, in my life of being immersed, in my adult life of being immersed in the legal profession, if I look at those four legs of the stool, I would say clients, forgive me, law firms are proud and focused on and invest in how they look after clients. They're proud and focused and invest a lot of time and money how to look after the colleagues, their people. Even today, I can tell you, around the world, I work with law firms around the world, we are poorly performing businesses. Typically, our lawyers are lawyers all day and they're in business only in the mornings. I tell you that I think it's coming up, the latest benchmarking from the Law Society. It shows all of this. And instead of looking at what our law position was last year, can we make it better next year? Instead, what law firms do is they wait for the Law Society benchmarking to come out and they can look at it and go, well, at least we're not the worst. It's the wrong way of looking at things. And the fourth leg of the stool, which has crept up on the entire profession, is what we're talking about today: compliance, risk management. You know, it used to be a bit of a tick box, quick, the inspector's coming, get all your appraisal, your file inspections done, what policies do we need? No, the four legs of the stool are now key. Now, if I come to that, that's the background to my answer to your question, Emma. If I now zoom in on it, if your leg, if the cash leg of the stool is weak, well, you've got to make up for that somehow. And one of the things is you become obsessive. And I've been there when I got things wrong as a managing partner in business and profit and cash generation terms. You've got to focus everything on that, because you're in an inefficient machine and you're putting in 5 tons of effort and you're going to get 1 ton of money out. It should be 5 tons in, 4.5 tons out. But we're too busy to fix that. So you've got to make up for it. If you don't make up for it in revenue terms, you've got to make up for it in cost terms. You've got to not allow time for compliance. You've got to not allow time for discussing and for leadership and for sharing best experiences internally. And never mind recruiting someone who can do the junior tasks on a compliance front so that risk management at a higher level can be accommodated, because you haven't got the money, the whole thing. And then you can't give pay rises, or pay rises that your good people want, and they can all get jobs anywhere, and people are paying off. Often I dare to say people are paying salaries they can't always afford in order to fill a gap. So someone's lost a lawyer. So what are you left with? You're maybe not left with your best people. Oh, well, and you're working them to death and not investing in their risk management skills, and on it goes. You're either on a spiral upwards or you're on a spiral downwards. For all 4 legs of the stool, they can all be made strong. It's what, I make a living out of this, and you see results. And it's something that Andrea mentioned. You can't always see it yourself. Listen to someone outside who doesn't get 1,000 emails a week. It took me, I can tell any managing partners or team leaders or middle management on this call, I can tell you, when I ceased being a managing partner, it was 2 years till my head stopped. 2 years till the washing machine went away. You can't think straight. So I would just recognize that there is a way, you've got to have your way. It's got to be non-negotiable. You cannot have the situation that you have almost universally in law firms, where the business support teams are pulling their hair out because the lawyers, and I have to say normally the partners, are fighting against them, are nodding but meaning that. To the business support around the country and the world, they feel it's like pushing a rock up a hill, trying to get people to do things. Lawyers and partners to do things. There has to be a non-negotiable way. And you can't have that until you've got leadership, which I'll come back to later in this seminar, indeed later in this series. So it's all joined together. If you do less better, you end up with more. Mute.
You're on mute, Emma.
On mute, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question because of time, but something I just want to highlight, that which I know is a point that Calum would have made, which is that there is an intrinsic link between financial stability in businesses and their risk profile. I've seen that many years ago working with the surveying profession. And Calum, I know that you highlighted that before today's seminar. We talked about people a lot, and clearly there's a direct correlation between finance and people, Simon, as you've made it. If a company's not making enough money to keep their best people, they're going to suffer with retention issues. But Paul, coming to you first. We increasingly talk about tech sometimes as being the sort of great savior. That's a whole other conversation for another day. But is risk management still about people? And if yes, what are the critical actions that business needs to take to support and empower their people? And Paul, this is for you first, and then Simon, I know you're very keen to address this as well. So
I think the whole of our industry is about people. It's always been at the root of what we do. We're lawyers, we represent people, we are people, hopefully, in terms of the way we present ourselves and our own personal risk profile as individuals. And I think every single lawyer that I come across cares. And I will always repeat that. And I think at the bottom line, the culture within the organization is key. The people that you work with, the people that support you, the people that you support are the thing that makes your business successful. Not what the SRA tell us to do, not what the CLC tell us to do, but our own moral and professional compass. And I think it's hugely important that within an organisation there is a massive culture of openness. And I feel, particularly for those that are joining the industry and the profession, that they are able to have these discussions and that we apply a real level of common sense to the risk profile of our organisation. Because at the end of the day, we're still running a business, we still have to make a profit. And frequently there are measures within organisations which feel very draconian, and actually it's very unlikely anybody's going to be able to comply with them. And the worst thing to do is have a set of rules, processes and procedures which you can't comply with because you're going to fall at the first hurdle. That then creates a stress level, that then creates a failure in the eyes of a regulator. We have to remember that at the end of the day, the regulator tells us that we have to achieve their goals in the way that we want to achieve them. They may not necessarily agree we have achieved them, but actually a lot of our time is spent fighting with the regulator to say, you may not agree with what this particular firm have achieved, but they have actually achieved the objective. And yes, we can change that, and maybe we'll do it in a different way going forward, but actually we are still in the place you want us to be, but not necessarily along the route that you asked.
Simon, coming to you, and I think what I'd really like to try and get across to our audience in this section is, if you've got one or two sort of top tips in relation to sort of people and culture that you can share.
I've probably got 100, but let me sift through them. Risk management is I'm told my camera isn't working. I'll carry on talking. Can you hear me okay, Emma?
We can hear you.
Risk management is down to people. What IT can alert, it can throw up reminders, it can throw up numbers on a case going the wrong way, or it can throw up reminders, but it's still down to people. If your people, so let me just roughly divide this up into junior people and partners. If your junior people are under such a cosh, under such a caseload, under such a workload, or targeted, or targets that are crushing them, then if that's what they're going to be rewarded for, that's what they're going to do. If there's no accountability on the risk management compliance side, then they literally don't need to do that. they'll get away with it, they'll get promoted, they'll get pay rises and all of that. But if they haven't got the time to do it, and then, you know, if you've, I've been a fee earner with hundreds of cases, you just got nowhere to go. You just out of control from the minute you get into work till the minute you go home. It's not a great environment. And law firms see that as being the only way to make sufficient profit. But actually, they're obsessed with profit. They should be more worried about cash. To get sufficient cash, your lawyers can work in a completely different way. They can do less better for more. They can have a less volatile working day, a less pressurized working day. The clients win, the lawyers win, the compliance and risk management machine wins because there's headspace to deal with these things. So that's the backdrop of it. I talked about senior people as well, though, partners. Partners are not, or ought not to be, and ought not to see themselves as senior fee earners with a bigger target. They should be leaders leading the way on risk management, on compliance, on client service, on self-development, on behaviours, personal behaviours, on inclusion and diversity, on everything. But all too often, partners in a firm, they've got really big targets. They haven't got time for anything either. So until the law firm, what's needed bizarrely is a partnership, and I write about this. There needs to be a partnership between the firm and the partners, and between the partners and the people, where everyone just takes a step back and looks and recognises that we're all driving ourselves nuts. And actually, when you do that, things give. So let's treat our people right. Let's treat our partners right. Let's have our partners treat our people right. And we can all bring in benefits for the client, for the people, for the business. It's hugely possible. I see it in action, and it happens very quickly. And an amazing thing, Emma, is people say, crikey, how have you and we achieved this so quickly? And that tells you something. It's always eminently achievable, but not while you're too busy.
I think, Simon, that's great advice for any business, actually, as much of the content from today as it doesn't matter if it's a legal services firm. I think that's just as pertinent to any other business. Just for our audience, we've covered a lot of ground today, so I just want to reassure everybody that's with us today that we will be taking a much deeper look into many of these topics throughout the risk management series, starting next week actually with Simon, who's going to be talking in more detail about leadership and culture and its impact on risk. Staying with the theme of people, Andrea, coming to you, the role of continuing professional development and training, we've seen huge changes in the way that training is delivered over the course of the last decade. Talk to me about what you're seeing, Andrea, what you think works and what doesn't work.
Well, we should be and are moving from teaching people the law and what particular act says this and what part of the act says this to what we need to be doing and why we're doing it. And that's important. And if I go back to the example of AML training, nobody needs to know which section relates to which. What they need to know is how do we do we protect them, protect the client by doing the processes that we've put in place. But it's not just about teaching the processes, it's about giving people real life stories and real evidence, anecdotal evidence, because that's the only way you're going to learn. Because if you're about to do something stupid, you may then think, actually, if I do this, I could end up with difficulty, could do something wrong. It's about making the training real, not sitting there for an hour listening to somebody go through an act. And it's the same effectively with policies that we write. I can write the most brilliant policies. You see them all over the place. Nobody reads them. I mean, I'm not daft. unless you're on your first day in a new job, you do not go back and read the policies. What we should be doing is, because it's possible the SRA may want to look at them sometime. But alongside that, what I do, what we need you to do. So when you're opening a file, have your handler's guide or whatever you want to call it. This is what we need you to do to get to that point. Not why we need to do it, not you're going to get X number of years, or the MLRO could get a number of years in prison for doing this. That's not why we're doing it. We're doing it to protect us and to protect the general public. And the other thing to tell people is, don't be worried, as I said before, about actually stepping up and speaking up. Because if you think there's something going wrong somewhere and you're not quite happy about it, but as Simon says, you're under a huge amount of pressure to build and to get everything through, but there's a risk that if you don't take the matter, you're not comfortable with where the money's coming from, or there's something going on, you need to speak up about it. You cannot take that risk on your own. And you need to speak to somebody and see whether it needs reporting. Does it need going to the SRA or to the NCA? Because you may be that last piece in the jigsaw. So you need to tell people that what they are spotting is not necessarily going to change something small, but it could be that somebody somewhere is waiting for that last piece of evidence to stop an entire load of money launderers going around. But it's about making your training relevant and appropriate, and not just having somebody sat in front of a webinar ticking the same box. And there's too many firms who are doing the same training over and over again.
And Calum, I know this is an area that you've got strong views on.
How are you?
Yeah. Someone seems to have a call on in the background, so if whoever can mute themselves, that'd be helpful. Yeah, that is absolute music to my ears, Andrea. I would say firms should do a little self-audit. Do you rely on a lot of preset e-learning modules? If so, in the vast majority of cases, that will be tick box learning that tells you about layering and things like that, but is absolutely no practical use whatsoever. And secondly, does your training say, have you read our policy on X, Y, and Z? Another perfect indicator that your processes are probably lacking and that you're doing a tick box exercise. Anybody that is expecting people to remember and apply every bit of their policy on X, Y, and Z without having it built into your processes is on a hiding to failure. I've got very little to add beyond that to what Andrea said. Learning has to promote engagement and participation. It should be active and applied learning, and it should also relate to your own ways of working, your culture, your escalation processes, because it should be personal to your firm and how you work, and it should be practical.
Can I add, please, Emma? So taking some of Andrea's words, it shouldn't be tick box learning, as Calum has just reinforced. That's just water off. It's water pouring off a rock. Actually, let's go back several stages. Let's build something which I've mentioned, which we called our way. This is the way we do things here. We're going to give you a great life, our people. We're going to change our clients' lives. We're going to make good money by doing less better for more. But crucially, the fourth leg of the stool, we're going to keep it safe. Now, that's compliance and risk management from a completely different, that's not forced on you, is it? Let's keep it safe. Do we want a setback of a 37 grand fine? Do we want cyber paralysis, etc.? Let's keep it safe. And again, you've got to win the hearts and minds of your people to make these things not compulsory, but desired on the part of all your people.
I'm going to jump back in because it should also be strategic, and your learning should be responsive. It should be continuous. You know, if you've had near misses, if you've had claims issues, review what's gone wrong, see if there's different ways of working required or additional training. If you apply new systems, make sure you train on them as well. And, you know, as part of your appraisal process based on people's performances, their weak points, give them targeted specific training to meet their needs.
Calum, all that you're talking about and we're all talking about is all very good. But if you're, you know, in the bulk of lawyers in the country are not partners, if your partners aren't doing any of this, it's not a great inspiration, is it?
No, well, no, absolutely. Well, this is where culture, leadership from the top. Yeah.
It's really interesting that you use the word safe, Simon, because I think safe actually traditionally in business has become a little bit tarnished. I think some people see it as boring and dull, but actually if every business had safe as one of its brand values and then thought about what that meant to the strategy of the firm and how it treated its people and its clients and protected its PI insurers, perhaps we'd be making some progress. Paul, what are your thoughts around this topic? And perhaps if you can just touch briefly on, you know, where you see tech perhaps assisting with the process of managing risk.
I think the importance also is keeping things practical. I think within organizations, there are multiple layers of education that is needed, and every form of training therefore has its place within the organization. Some training platforms work well, and quite rightly, as the panel are suggesting, if we can keep it more specific and we can keep it very, very tailored for the organization, then that is fantastic. But there are sometimes challenges for organizations, whether it's the number of people they have or the skill sets within their organization or the affordability of getting these things. I think it's also keeping it practical and it's keeping it sensible within the parameters. Everybody wants to be able to give the best that they can to their people. Technology is a massive support in all areas of our businesses now, and we'll talk about whether, you know, the obtaining of knowledge to implement the technology and the way in which we utilize the technologies, but they are absolutely out there. And you know, the use of AI and the use of other technologies, which we are running kind of scared of at the moment, quite rightly in lots of ways, but actually those things can hugely help the confidence of your people. So the training goes hand in hand with confidence. And I think it's really important that we have a workforce within our businesses that are confident to approach their jobs in the right way, and in the way that is right for that particular business, and that is different for each one.
Thank you, Paul. We've covered a lot of ground today. It's amazing how quickly an hour goes when we're in these discussions. I am going to ask you, each of you, in a minute to sort of summarize with you know, your top tip. For our audience, if you do have any questions, or indeed any discussion points you'd like to raise, or anything that you think people might be able to learn from, please do share those in the Q&A. Simon, I'm going to come to you first. What's the one key takeaway that you want our audience to leave with today with regard to this topic? Oh, you're on mute, Simon. Oh, no, you're fine. You're good now.
Yeah. Don't do what law firms do, which is think you can turn one dial. This month's dial is risk management. Then next month, we're going to turn the marketing dial. And then the following month, we're going to try and get our whip down. All the dials are joined together. Have your way of doing everything, your way that encompasses the four legs of the stool: colleagues, clients, compliance, cash. Everything fits together and you will find yourself on a spiral upwards. But to repeat, don't think this is one dial we can get right.
Lovely. Thank you, Simon. Andrea, your top tip.
My top tip, I think it would be involve all the team. So involve everybody. Don't rely on one person having all the knowledge. Don't allow that person to have the control. Because if that one person disappears or does something wrong, you're all going to go down with them. Effectively spread the load, spread the risk.
Thank you. Calum?
Well, I loved Simon's phrase, do less, better for more. Simon, I'm going to steal that. And my practical application of that is, it sounds very dull, but implementing effective and meaningful client and matter onboarding processes, filtering out the work at an early stage that's outside your risk profile, that's going to be messier than you expect, that's going to deliver actually more pain than it's worth. Doing that work up front, it may seem like a pain, but actually do that work properly and you set yourself fair for a much better, much more efficient transaction that is likely to be more remunerative and safer.
That's a tip, Calum, that I've been using for years, is, know which clients you want to work with and be brave enough to tell the clients you don't want to work with, because they're always the ones that are going to cause you problems. Paul, your top tip.
For me, it's losing the categorization of risk and compliance from our language. Run the business as one team, delivering the best service that you can, treating people how you would like to be actually treated, internally and externally, protecting the point you made, Emma, of safety, and make sure people feel comfortable and safe in their environment. And I think most of the risk will be managed successfully by utilising those behaviours. And if you can't manage it, then there are specialist support available externally, and I don't think we should be afraid to use those either.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you. As I said, we have covered a lot of ground today. Every single one of these topics that we've covered, we will be addressing throughout this series. Please do visit the Today's Training website to keep up to date with the other events that we've got in the series. I am going to put out another call for any questions. So please, if you've got questions, do post them in the Q&A or indeed in the chat. And we'll be happy to answer them. In the meantime, just while I give our audience the opportunity to ask a question, I've got one question I wanted to ask, which actually is related to a lot of what we've talked about in relation to people. Remote working and risk. Should we all be back in the office to safeguard risk or not?
Can I go first?
Simon. Yes.
The answer is yes. There's a risk, though, that you will lose people. What's happened? I work with a legal recruitment consultant, and they were the consultancy, and they were telling me that 2 years ago, working from home, or flexibility, as we called it, was the number one factor in lawyers leaving or joining a firm. They now tell me their research shows that the number one factor is now money. It seems to be across the profession, and these were questions asked of, it's a Realm Recruit, and they asked their candidates, why did you take our call? Why did you accept that job? It used to be because of flexibility. It's now money. It seems to be subsiding. Cost of, even if there's reduced flexibility, people are still moving jobs. The risk that arises from work from home lawyers makes my blood run cold. Calum will be on all fours here with me on this, because I was a managing partner and I watched, in a lifetime of management, you see a lot of claims arising. Horrendously, private client was a huge area of claims, and that was that cannot be reduced by lawyers working from home. It can be reduced by a junior lawyer sitting next to a senior lawyer, by a senior lawyer listening to a junior lawyer on the phone, by a junior lawyer listening to a senior lawyer on the phone, by going to meetings with you can run as many online modules as you want. You will never get training like that. So I'm all for it being removed.
Is anybody going to speak up for the other side? Paul,
Yeah,
Andrea,
100%.
Calum?
100% for the other side. I think there is a balance between the two, but I absolutely think that working from remote locations is and can be equally as successful as being within the office. I think a hybrid situation probably gives us the best result. I think both from a mental health perspective and from a professional perspective, but I am very much a supporter of both remote and hybrid working.
And for me, I'm having to be pragmatic because I was much more in Simon's camp, to be honest. But it's also it's an individual thing as well. And I recognise that the issue about staffing and retention is practically a really important one. And I think the fully remote fundamentally have problems with. I think hybrid can work well. Most important is firm culture, because if you have 100% in-office environment and you've got the wrong culture and the wrong attitude of management, the in-office is sort of almost irrelevant or just part of the damage. Whereas if you've got a really good firm culture and one that really uses the tools that are available now and combines that with a decent amount of in-person time, I think that will carry more weight than just whether someone's in office 100% of the time or not. And I have to declare that although I'm someone who is a great believer of working in the office, my own role wouldn't be possible without hybrid working. So I can't stand on a pedestal and say that.
I think you make a really important point, Calum, which is so difficult to cater for in businesses, which is actually is what works for some individuals doesn't work for others. And I think that's increasingly the case. Actually, I was of a generation where we were brought up that we had to go to the office. We didn't have a choice, and we did it whether it worked or not. But it's very difficult to cater for all our individuals. But actually, in the case of risk management, is important. Andrea, do you have any views on the working from home debate and risk?
Well, as you might have heard just now, the dog started barking, so I'm clearly working from home. And on a personal basis, I do majority of my work from home, or although I go out to clients and do in-person, but really important. A lot of what I do, most of it, is me working with clients on an individual basis. If I had a team and if I was training junior lawyers, absolutely, you need to be in the office. We all learned by osmosis, as just listening. When I was doing my training, just listening to the partners holding conversations or sitting in meetings. You can't replace that with sitting at home more than just working a file or knowing what the law is. It's having that relationship and being able to build relationships. So I think it's a combination. But if you're insisting that your junior fee earners have to be in, you have to have senior partners there as well, because who are they learning from? So it's that combination. As I say, if I had a team, then absolutely I'd be working in the office together with them. And I think, again, so if you're, for those poor people who during lockdown were actually doing their training contracts, I mean, that must have been a nightmare. I don't quite know how you get through it. And that is going to have a knock-on effect. And that's not being patronising to junior lawyers. It's just, that's what you need to do. So there is that balance. But no, please don't demand we all go into the office. Absolutely, because I get the best work done when I'm sat here.
Thank you, Andrea. And I think actually finishing with the word balance and the suggestion that makes with regard to taking common sense judgment is so important to so much of what we've discussed. We've used the word common sense a lot. We've used the phrase treating others as we'd like to be treated. In my experience, so much of this actually is human nature and is common sense. And sometimes I think regulatory burden removes the ability for us to think with a degree of common sense. But I think if we think that compliance with regulation is the end point, and everything we've discussed today, particularly I think Simon's four-legged stool, is the foundations that enables us to meet compliance. I think that's a pretty good starting point. We haven't got any questions from our audience today, so I'm going to finish by saying thank you very, very much to our panelists, Paul Saunders from Legal Eye, Calum MacLean from Miller Insurance Services, Simon McCrum from McCrum Legal, and Andrea Cohen from Waitman's Compli. I very much hope that we will see many of you at future sessions in this risk management series. If you do have any questions for any of the panel, or you would like introductions to the panel, please do send them over to David Opie at Today's Media, or indeed to myself. My email address is on LinkedIn. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found it useful. Any feedback is gratefully received, and have a good rest of day. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.